Alright, what's going on, guys? One of the things that makes the world of Elden Ring so interesting and compelling to consistently dive back into is that it's brimming with life in all corners, which is naturally hard to pull off in a game that's thematically focused on death. But to supplement this, Elden Ring has such a wide cast of characters and inhabitants of its world, all of which have a story to tell. But today I want to focus on just one that definitely isn't the most popular or the most memorable, and seems to be forgotten by not only the players, but the game itself, and they are the ancient heroes of Zamor. In my opinion, the most forgotten character in all of Elden Ring. So today we're going to tell their story, or what little there is of it, because like their usage in the game's world, their memory as well has been lost to time, and although sparse, is incredibly fascinating. But as we get into that today, if you want to stay up to date on all things Elden Ring, FromSoftware, and Souls-likes, and enjoy the lore and discussion of these games, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's begin. The Zamor story starts in the bleak cold of the mountaintops, in a period long before it came to look like it does now. The Zamor mask gives us a good overarching picture of the origins of these warriors, and it reads as follows. Mask worn by knights of Zamor, hailed as heroes in the war against the giants. These long-lived warriors, clad in biting freezing winds, are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. When we encounter them in-game, we'll notice some very stark features that stand out among the rest of Elden Ring's world. First off, their height, standing far taller than the player. Their armor is very tribal in nature, much different than the classic medieval looks that we can find commonly. Their arms and legs are bound in chains, as if they've been held in captivity somewhere, but have since escaped. They have long flowing white hair that falls off the back of their mask, but then we'll notice how they fight, swinging their swords in a manner that flows like water, and wielding frost magic with no talisman and casting it very gently. Everything about them is abnormal. What makes this much stranger is that the only place we can naturally find Zamor Knights in all of Elden Ring is a very tiny outcropping called Zamor Ruins. This makes them one of the top 3 rarest enemies in the entire game, excluding the boss variants, and that alone should raise some eyebrows. But while visually it may be identical to the other ruins we can find throughout the game, the very specific naming and the fact that these are ruins tells us more about their story. Here in the Zamor village, we can find another item relating to them. The Zamor Ice Storm spell has a description that reads, Ice sorcery of the town of Zamor. Cloaked in an icy tempest, the Knights of Zamor have challenged the fire giants since ancient times. The description found in their sword gives us more specific details. It reads, weapon wielded by the Knights of Zamor, who earned great renown during the war against the giants. In apparent devotion to winter, the curved sword is styled after an icy wind and imbued with a powerful frost effect. So let's paint this picture for a second. Zamor was once a town, home to the Zamor Knights, natives of the mountaintops during prehistoric times, and they were locked in a war between fire and ice against the fire giants, whether it be over territory or simply because they were their natural elemental enemy. And this would continue for an unspecified amount of time until a new dogma would appear in the lands between, and its conquest would reach the north. As the age of the Erdtree drew near, the last obstacle in its way were the giants. And we can see this path of death and destruction all throughout the mountaintops, with the bodies still frozen and sigils of the Erdtree pinning them down. And naturally in this conquest, all manner of aid was employed. And what better opportunity for the Zamor to win their war than by joining the side of Godfrey? When we find boss versions of Zamor Knights, they're given the name Ancient Hero, which was not a name they gave themselves, but was given to them by Godfrey's forces, which is why we can find one of these ancient heroes at the Erdtree roots of the hero's grave nearby, which signifies that they were given the hero's death of Erdtree burial, a reward only given to a select few. But why then is their town in ruins and their kind so few throughout the land? I think that points to a dark fate for these people. The only time we find a Zamor Knight outside of the mountaintops is at the exact furthest opposite point on the map. At the very base of the Weeping Peninsula, we find the Weeping Everjail, and unlike most Everjails, this one has an extra layer of security. For a very mysterious reason, an ancient hero of Zamor is imprisoned here, and to make it even more mysterious, upon defeating this boss, the player receives Radagon's Scar Seal, which on its own opens up a floodgate of questions. This talisman has a description that reads, an eye engraved with an Elden rune, said to be the seal of King Consort Radagon. These seals represent the lifelong duty of those chosen by the gods. Now, we don't have enough evidence here to paint a picture one way or the other, definitively saying why this Zamor Knight is imprisoned and why he has this item, but I can give you a theory. Many of the things we see in the Age of Godfrey were changed or done away with when Radagon took over. One such example is Colosseum combat, where we learn from the duelists that they were exiled from the Colosseums. Even Godfrey's own famous Crucible Knights became objects of scorn over time, and we can even find one of them locked away in an Everjail as well. What we can see here is a pattern of doing away with the things that once were, throwing away the relics of a bygone age. After the Zamor Knights served their usefulness in the war against the giants, it's likely that they became viewed as nothing more than something to be forgotten. And that's not only true of their kind, even the frost magic that they revered is no longer practiced in the lands between except by a select few who chose to pursue it. And the same is true for most of the things from the Zamor's era. And we talked about this quite a bit in my lore video about the Alabaster and Onyx Lords, who are also from this time period and share many of the same features as the Zamor. And we can see this ring true for pretty much everything that's described as being from that time period. The Guardian Golems are mostly discarded throughout the world. There's no longer a practice of the power of meteorites in the study, which opens up a whole new world into the lore that we'll explore eventually. But we can also see this happen even further down the timeline with the use of astrology in the study of the stars. And even though we can recognize this pattern of casting away the things that are no longer needed, I'm not sure that's a good enough explanation to account for their shackles in the ruins of Zamor Village. This is the point in their story where we have to look beyond what we can find currently in the game. Because not only were the Zamor forgotten in the lore and the world that we currently play in, but they were also forgotten during the line of development. One of the first gameplay images we ever saw of Elden Ring was a character standing next to a Zamor spirit summon. And first of all, let me say I am very sad that this was cut. It probably would have been the best spirit in the game. But when data miners went into the files and investigated the Zamor, they found some strange things. Zully the Witch has a video breaking down the file names of the Zamor, and in that we learn that their name was once, at least in the files, called Red-Eyed Gypsy Buddy. Now obviously that was never going to be the public name, but the significance there are the words Red Eye, and we learned through other research that red eyes were associated with the Frenzied Flame, at least once upon a time in development. So is it possible that their design was created with the idea of them being associated with the Frenzied Flame, and might that explain why they were shackled and bound? I think it's a real possibility. And if that were the case, they might have been repurposed very late into development as the Zamor Knights we now know. But just like their lore and history in the lands between appears to have been forgotten by its people, their development is something we can also never know since we weren't there to experience it. The Zamor are some of my favorite characters in all of Elden Ring, not only because I love their design, being this sort of ancient culture that's very alien in comparison to everything else we know about Elden Ring's world, but also because they give us a little peek into the past of what it looked like before the events of the game. This whole time period of the Zamor's prime, and when the giants ruled the lands between, is very fascinating to me, and I want to dive into it more. But it's a shame that it seems to be almost in its entirety lost to time, and we only have these tiny little fractional pieces to work with, and one of the tiniest are the Zamor, a clan of warriors so powerful that they could fight back against giants all throughout history. And although we'll likely never learn more about them, the little bit we do get is definitely worth looking into. But that is the story of the Zamor heroes. By far Elden Ring's most forgotten characters, at least in my opinion, and unfortunately so because they are really cool. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you think there are some other characters in Elden Ring's lore that deserve the spot of the most forgotten? I definitely think there's some contenders, but this was my pick. Anyways though guys, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.